You're not getting a single cent of my money. Not one." Lila's voice had a razor's edge that sliced straight through me. We had just returned from my husband William's funeral, 12 hours since we lowered the love of my life into the ground in Forest Hills, and my daughter looked like a stranger wearing her face. Her eyes carried a feverish glint I had never witnessed, a glittering greed that made my stomach churn. "The 300 million are mine now, Mother," she went on, shaking a paper at me so furiously the embossed seal flashed in the lamplight. "All of it. And you? You don't matter here. Only half a day since we buried William Harding, husband, builder of a citywide real estate portfolio, the quiet compass of our home in Beacon Hill, and my own child was banishing me from the brownstone we had restored brick by brick over 40 years of marriage. "Lila, please," I whispered, still in the black dress I had chosen with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My mascara had surrendered long ago, traced on my cheeks like soot. "We just laid your father to rest. How can you be this unkind?" "Unkind?" She laughed with contempt that bounced off the crown molding. "Do you know what's unkind, Eleanor? That you spent decades as a leech, living off Dad's work like it was your due. Those days are over. This house is mine. The accounts are mine. And you," she paused to look me up and down, "are excess." The attorney, Ben Whitaker, cleared his throat where he stood near the bay window, visibly uncomfortable. He had been the one to read the will that morning and confirm that William had left the entirety of his public estate to our only child. Yet there was something in his eyes, a quiet signal that said the afternoon wasn't what it seemed. "You have 24 hours to vacate," Lila announced, striding across the Persian rug like a general in conquest. "And don't come crawling back. You are not my burden. For 40 years you coasted on Dad. Now you can learn how actual work feels." My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a heat that rose in my chest like a furnace. This was the little girl I once soothed after nightmares, the toddler whose scraped knees I kissed, the teenager whose first heartbreak I nursed with chamomile and patience. And now she shoved me toward the foyer with a hard, sudden thrust that nearly put me off my heels. "You know what else?" she added, palm on the door. "Don't bother showing up at anyone else's funeral. As of today, you are dead to me." The door slammed with a report like a gunshot. Outside, a fine mist had started to fall, a damp veil settling over Mount Vernon Street. I stood on the stoop, staring at the townhouse we had loved and fought for, its fanlight glowing like an indifferent moon. I took the steps slowly, each one heavy, and crossed to where my car waited under a linden tree. Rain soaked the shoulders of my dress. The cold couldn't compete with the ice that had formed around my heart. "Mrs. Harding, Eleanor, please, wait." Ben jogged after me, holding a leather folder tight to his chest. "I need to speak with you. It's important." In his expression, I recognized something that steadied me: complicity and knowledge. It was the same look William used to wear when he'd tucked an ace into the lining of a plan. "This is about what I think it is?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He nodded gravely. "Your husband was far more deliberate than Lila can fathom. You should know the entire truth before anything else happens." We got into my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the parlor window and caught Lila watching from behind a sheer curtain. Her triumph traded for worry. She had no idea what I was about to learn. Ben's office on State Street faced the harbor, the lights of ferries smearing silver on the water. He led me in without a word. My thoughts ping-ponged between disbelief and a dull, rising anger. 40 years. 40 years of building not only holdings but a home, and my daughter had exiled me as if I were a trespasser. "Please sit," Ben said softly once we were inside. Pity flickered in his eyes, and something else, hope. I sank into the familiar leather chair opposite his desk, the same seat where William and I had signed estate documents years ago. Diplomas lined the walls beside Whitaker family photographs. I stared at them and felt the absence of everything that had felt secure that morning. "There's something Lila doesn't know," he began, opening the folder he had clutched. "Your husband anticipated his daughter's temperament. He prepared for this moment methodically." I drew a handkerchief from my bag, dabbing tears that wouldn't stop. "Ben, please. I've already lost my husband. Now I've lost my daughter. Don't hand me hope that won't hold." "It isn't hope. It's law." He spread a sheaf of documents across the desk. "Do you remember when William insisted on meeting just the three of us 6 months ago, without Lila?" I nodded. He had been specific. A private conversation, matters concerning us as spouses. That day he executed an addendum, an operative clause triggered by specific behavior. Ben tapped a paragraph with his pen. "If Lila displayed extreme cruelty toward you during the period of mourning, the entire inheritance would revert to you automatically." For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying William knew his daughter and safeguarded you." Ben's mouth tightened into the first smile I'd seen from him all day. "The 300 million, the Beacon Hill home, the Cape properties, the commercial buildings, everything returns to you if we demonstrate that Lila met the conditions." My tears changed flavor, no longer grief alone, but something like justice. "How do we prove it?" I asked. Ben lifted his phone. The screen showed an audio app's red wave form. I recorded the afternoon, start to finish. Every insult, the expulsion from your own home, all of it. I pressed my hands to my face and wept, but gratitude threaded through the sobs. William, my careful chess-playing William, was still protecting me from beyond the veil. "There's more," Ben went on gently. "William left precise instructions. For a time, Lila must believe she's in command. You must permit her to reveal herself in public. Only then do we trigger the clause permanently." "You're telling me to pretend I've lost everything." "For a while," he confirmed. "Your husband judged that power would intoxicate her quickly. He also wanted to give you space to decide whether to take it all back or grant her one last chance." I stood and went to the window, staring at the lights threading over the harbor. William had been 4 steps ahead in negotiations. Apparently, he'd been the same kind of strategist in our family. "What do I do now?" "Go somewhere modest. Act as though you're starting over. I'll monitor her actions. According to William's letter, she'll show the world exactly who she is, and soon. And if I'm wrong about her, if this cruelty is grief flailing and she becomes herself again?" Ben rested a fatherly hand on my shoulder. "With respect, Eleanor. We both saw who she was today. William knew it too. That's why he drafted this." I gathered the documents into my purse. "How much time do I have?" 6 months to activate the clause. William recommends waiting at least 30 days to confirm a pattern. We left after dark. Ben guided me to a discreet boutique hotel near the Common, the sort of place I never would have considered as a residence. "One more thing," he said, withdrawing a sealed envelope from his briefcase. "From William. He asked me to deliver it only after Lila revealed her true nature. I believe we've crossed that threshold." Alone under the soft lamp of the small room, I turned the envelope over. My name was written in William's elegant hand, "For my dearest Eleanor, strongest soul I know." The seal cracked. I unfolded 2 pages of his handwriting, the sweeping script I had traced with my eyes across grocery lists and love notes for decades. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. "If you're reading this, then Lila has shown her hand and the plan is in motion. Forgive me for holding part of it back, but your shock had to be genuine." Tears blurred the lines. "In recent years, I watched our girl harden. You saw it too, even if you couldn't accept it. The day she dismissed Mr. Donnelly from the garden after 20 years over a small raise. The way she spoke about those with less. The disdain for cousins when fortunes thinned. I could not let grief fall on you and cruelty follow." I looked up, the hotel window reflecting my wet face. He had seen what I refused to see. Our daughter was adrift. There is more. The $300 million in the public will is not our true net worth. Additional accounts exist, in your name, under your maiden name, Eleanor May Collins, at Harbor and Commonwealth Bank, downtown office. Password: the date of our first kiss, May 15th, 1985. Ben has the keys. He will only release them when you're ready. Including those investments, the estate tallies closer to $450 million. My breath hitched. William, forever cautious, forever generous, had been more meticulous than I imagined. Your task now is to observe. Let Lila believe the throne is hers, and you will see what absolute power does to a fragile soul. When it's time to step in, she will have learned humility the hard way. But remember, the goal is not punishment, it is rescue. She is still our child. Only loss may teach her what matters. The letter continued with contacts, old friends who would quietly shore me up, and a stepwise plan to recover the fortune and our daughter. P.S. At the bank, you'll also find a surprise. Our friend Lionel has been shepherding some technology stakes that never made the main ledger. Our true net may be higher than you think. I love you beyond the horizon. I folded the letter and tucked it with the legal papers. It wasn't about money, not for me. It was about a chance to win back Lila's soul. I called Ben. "Tomorrow," I said. "The bank." 9 a.m. sharp, he replied. "Eleanor, William's love for you is the bravest thing I've seen in this work." I slept little, not from fear but a strange alertness. Grief had been a fog. Purpose cut through it like morning sun. Ben arrived precisely at 9. As we drove past the State House and down toward Downtown Crossing, he filled in quiet details. William began rearranging assets 2 years ago, when Lila's entitlement sharpened. He wanted redundancies. Whatever happened, you would not be exposed. At Harbor and Commonwealth, a private banking manager named Avery Reed received us with grave politeness. "Mrs. Harding, Mr. Whitaker, I'm deeply sorry for your loss," she said, leading us to a glassed-in conference room. "Mr. Harding was respected here. His provisions to protect you are impressive." For 2 hours, Avery walked me through accounts I hadn't known existed. Silent positions in index funds, equity in medical device startups, real property with mortgages long paid. Considering market activity since Mr. Harding's passing, the consolidated value is approximately $462 million, she concluded. I sat back, lightheaded, not solely at the numbers, but at the architecture of my husband's care. "And the accounts Lila knows?" I asked. "They exist, with the $300 million specified in the public will," Avery said. "Those are subject to the addendum Mr. Whitaker described. If invoked, control returns to you." We left with new clarity. I was not a helpless widow cast into the street. I was a woman with resources and an obligation to decide wisely how to deploy them. But first, I needed to watch who my daughter became when no one said no to her. For the next 2 weeks, I learned to be invisible. From my small room and with Ben's discreet help, I observed Lila's transformation. The first sign arrived 3 days after she expelled me. Ben called, voice tight. She fired the entire household staff. Rosa, our cook of 15 years. Teresa, our housekeeper who had rocked Lila as a baby. All of them, he said. 1 week of severance and a line. I no longer need you. Rosa phoned me in tears asking what she did wrong. What reason did Lila give? According to Rosa, he said, Lila told her people like her no longer fit her new life. She plans to hire more sophisticated staff. I closed my eyes. William had predicted this. Money wasn't the rot. It revealed the rot. A week later, Ben slid photographs across a cafe table, images a private investigator had taken. Another of William's chess pieces. There was Lila, laughing under the chandeliers of a Newbury Street boutique, arms looped with shopping bags worth more than Rosa's car. Receipts itemized the spree. 150,000 in a single day. Dresses, jewels, shoes, wants dressed as needs. And there she was again, draped in a gold gown beside women I'd never seen, raising a flute of champagne priced like a mortgage payment. There's more, Ben said, jaw tight. She went to the Hawthorne Club yesterday, canceled your membership, asked that your name be removed from all plaques. My breath left me. Not for the club. That mahogany monument to old Boston meant little compared to the deeper wound, but for the cruelty of erasure. Lila wasn't just gorging on new privilege. She was rewriting her history to delete me. That afternoon, my phone rang. Mrs. Harding, it's Patrick Donnelly, our former gardener. Patrick, I said, my voice catching. How are you? I stopped by the house to pay respects, he said gently. Miss Lila met me at the gate, told me men like me don't belong there anymore, shouted I should leave and never come back, said the poor shouldn't contaminate her new life. The words scraped. Patrick, who had coaxed every inch of soil behind that townhouse to flower. Patrick, who once brought Lila a shoebox nest when he found a fallen robin. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I thought you should know, he said, and cleared his throat. Mr. Harding was a good man. He'd be ashamed to see this. After we hung up, I sat in silence. William had known. He had seen entitlement harden into cruelty. He fashioned a plan not to crush our daughter, but to give her a chance to choose differently. And the world, faithful tutor that it is, was already preparing its lessons. The next day, Ben appeared in the hotel lobby with a folder that made my stomach drop. She's listing assets, he said, spreading paperwork. The cedar-shingled Cape Cottage where we'd spent summers eating corn and watching meteor showers. The downtown penthouse William bought when Lila started at Northeastern. Even one of the office buildings whose elevators still wore his nameplate. Why? I asked, though the answer hovered. Immediate liquidity. New acquaintances are whispering about can't-miss opportunities, quick returns, exotic funds. He shook his head. The broker says she wants freedom from legacy properties. In the days that followed, I watched Lila burn through not just wealth, but relationships, values, and the quiet dignity William had prized. She hosted parties that felt like auctions. People she'd never met embraced her as a long-lost sister. She obliged them with tailored generosity and was repaid in exuberant flattery. It was theater, all of it, and I was in the back row, taking notes like a critic who already knows the ending. 3 weeks after my eviction, Ben rang at 6 a.m., his emergency hour. Come to my office, he said. She's done something that changes everything. I was barely seated when he pressed play on a security video from the Hawthorne Club. The charity gala William and I had chaired for a decade was proceeding in his memory that night. The expectation was simple. Lila would show up, say a few words, keep the tradition of generosity alive. Instead, The footage showed my daughter storming the ballroom in a jeweled column dress, her chin high. She took the microphone without preamble. "My father is gone," she declared to a room of startled donors, "and with him, his naive charities. This money has better uses than being wasted on people who don't appreciate it." Gasps rippled across tables. Faces I'd known for years, hospital directors, shelter founders, scholarship recipients grown into adults, registered the kind of hurt that leaves a mark. "Watch the parking lot," Ben said, switching clips. There stood Henry Lowell, an old friend of William's who ran one of the foundations our family had supported since before Lila could spell her name. "Your father would be heartsick," he said, the grief in his voice unmistakable. "Those funds help families who have nothing. Have you no mercy?" "My father was sentimental," Lila replied coolly. "I'm practical. Money is meant to be enjoyed, not handed out to freeloaders." Ben paused the video. "Eleanor, in my opinion, the threshold has been crossed. We can invoke the clause now." I looked at the screen and saw not only the stranger my daughter had become, but the child she once was, fragile under bluster. William had given me tools to retrieve everything. He had also given me the wisdom to remember why. "Not yet," I said quietly. "The lesson hasn't landed. I'm going to let her meet the consequences first." The world didn't make me wait long. Exactly 1 month after I was banished, her new friends did what parasites do. Ben called with the tone he reserved for bad news, wrapped around a strange, moral satisfaction. Her investment partners vanished. They took $50 million. I sat slowly, processing. $50 million. 1/6 of what she thought she controlled. How? "They met at an exclusive party 3 weeks ago," Ben said. "Promised to double her money in 6 months, importing European art. Our investigator traced aliases, shell accounts in island jurisdictions, classic grift. She signed without counsel, told them she trusted her instincts." That afternoon, my phone rang with a voice I had missed more than I wanted to admit. "Mom?" Just the one syllable, small, scared, took me back to Band-Aids and fairy tale bandits conquered with a flashlight. "Hello, Lila," I answered evenly. I need to see you. Please." "Where?" "At the house." A pause that swallowed and tried again. "Our house." Half an hour later, I stood where I had stood 100 mornings making coffee, 1,000 evenings slipping out of heels. Lila opened immediately, as if she'd been standing sentry. She looked wrecked, hair unbrushed, mascara smeared like bruises, yesterday's green dress shining with a different, cheaper sheen now that panic clung to it. "Come in," she said without meeting my eyes. The rooms were unrecognizable. The warm cherry furniture William and I had chosen was gone, replaced with lacquered austerity that reflected nothing and no one. Family photos had vanished. In their place hung enormous abstract canvases that screamed price tags and silence. Even the air smelled alien, like someone had tried to disinfect memory. "What happened, Lila?" I asked, though I knew. She folded onto the new sofa and cried. "I was conned, Mom. 50 million. They vanished." I sat beside her, keeping my hands in my lap. Everything in me wanted to gather her up. Everything in William's letter warned me to let the moment stand. "What are you going to do?" I asked gently. "I don't know. The attorneys I called say the money is untraceable. Ben refused to take the case. Everyone vanished when they heard." Her voice thinned. "When they heard I lost it." "Why did you call me?" I asked. "Because..." She lifted her eyes, and there for the first time in months I saw something like humility. "Because I have no one else. The people I thought were friends evaporated at the first hint of trouble, and I treated everyone who loved me like garbage, especially you." The admission landed in the quiet like rain easing parched ground. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't deserve it," she said. "But could you stay tonight? Help me figure out how to fix anything?" I stayed in the guest room, my room, once, and stared at the ceiling while the heat clanked through radiators that had rung with William's laughter a lifetime ago. In the next days, I watched Lila fumble toward the edge of a new awareness. The remaining funds still represented a colossal fortune, but fear changed how she breathed. "Do you think Dad would be disappointed?" she asked one evening over takeout she could barely taste. "Your father loved you," I said. "He also prized kindness and responsibility." "What do you think?" She stared at her hands. "I think he'd be ashamed, not just of the money, but of how I treated people. Rosa, Patrick, you, everyone who stood by us." "What do you plan to do about it?" "I don't know if anything can be undone." The question told me the lesson had entered her bloodstream. But the world, relentless tutor, had another chapter ready. 3 days later, Ben called early. "The bank has initiated audits," he said. "A report flagged movements after the fraud. They'll freeze everything during the investigation, likely 2 months. I climbed the stairs and found Lila at the kitchen island with a stack of glossy bills and a calculator, as if numbers might behave differently under her stare. I told her about the freeze. She absorbed it quietly, eyes moving like she was tracking birds. "I suppose I earned this," she said finally. Not defiant, not theatrical, just tired. "After everything I did, maybe I need to learn how normal works." The next 8 weeks introduced my daughter to a world she'd never noticed. With the main accounts locked and only cash at hand, she tried at first to preserve a simulation of extravagance. Credit cards, baubles she could pawn. But invoices continued to arrive like tides. "Mom, none of this adds up," she said one morning, forehead pressed to spreadsheets. "The monthly cost of this house is... I don't even have words." "How much do you think it takes?" I asked. 5,000, she guessed, flinching. 22, I said, sliding the utilities, insurance, maintenance, and payroll she herself had inflated by hiring a designer team to replace Rosa and Teresa. Her face went white. 22, just to keep the lights on? "You asked what normal is," I said softly. "For many, it's deciding which bill to pay late. For some, it's trusting a stranger at a food pantry. Perspective is a generous teacher." "What am I going to do?" "You could start," I said, "by getting a job." She let out a humorless laugh. "At 35, with a degree I never used and no experience, who would hire me?" It was a fair question, and a painful one. In protecting her from hardship, William and I had left her unarmored for life. She tried at first to leap to management. Each interview ended with that bland, deadly phrase, "We're looking for candidates with demonstrated experience." Pride cracked under pressure. Overdue notices are excellent chisels. 3 weeks later, she came home with a paper schedule and a thin smile. "They hired me at a boutique," she said, "part-time, $1,200 a month." After her first day, she collapsed into a chair and groaned. "My manager is 20 and treats me like I'm made of air. Customers are not kind." "How do you feel?" "Embarrassed," she admitted, "and exhausted. My feet and my back hate me. How do people do this for decades?" But then something modest and miraculous happened. After the second week, she started talking about her coworkers, Danielle on mornings, who supported 3 children and a sick mother with 2 jobs and never complained. Ren, who studied nights and folded jeans with the care of a surgeon. Mina, who brought soup when anyone coughed. "Mom," Lila said one night, eyes wide with a kind of wonder, "I whined about losing 50 million. Danielle has probably never seen 50,000 at once, and she's stronger than I am. William would have been proud, admiration decoupled from status. A month later, the world delivered a scene I could never have scripted. Lila burst in pale and shaking. "Something terrible happened at work, she said. Danielle got a call. Her youngest was in a car accident. He needs surgery that insurance barely covers. 15,000. My breath caught. And? She fell apart. I've never seen someone so afraid. She doesn't have it. What are you going to do? Lila stared toward her closet as if it had become a moral landscape. I own a bracelet worth more than that operation. Dresses that cost more than people make in a year. Her voice steadied. I'm going to sell the bracelet. That night after she slept, I phoned Ben. How's the plan? He asked. Better than William dared hope, I said. I see the girl she used to be. Shall we reveal the truth? Not yet, I said. One more test. I need to know this isn't desperation. It's transformation. The next day, Lila sold the diamond and paid the hospital in cash. When Danielle's tears fell into her palms and gratitude replaced panic in a single breath, my daughter's face changed, like a window had opened. I thought we might be near the end of William's syllabus, but life wrote an extra chapter. A letter arrived with thick paper and a seal I recognized from holiday cards years back. The mark of William's reclusive younger brother of the heart, our friend and investor, Lionel Hart. Ms. Harding, it read. We regret to inform you that Mr. Lionel Hart passed last month. He named you sole heir. Estimated value $75 million. Lila stared at the page. 75, she whispered. After everything, the money returns. This was the real examination. Having tasted scarcity and humility, what would she do with abundance? What she didn't know, I held veto power over the bequest, part of a family compact Lionel and William had drawn up long ago. I chose not to reveal it. I wanted to watch her answer when the universe offered her a second coin flip. Her first response surprised me. She reread the letter, sat very still, and then said, 2 months ago I would have sprinted to claim it. Now I'm not sure I want my old life back. What do you want, then? I asked. She went to the window and looked over the postage stamp garden Patrick had once choreographed into seasons. At the store, I learned I can work. I can solve problems. When someone says, thank you, it's because I earned it. She glanced at me, a little shy. I want to help people I hurt. Danielle, Rosa, Patrick, those foundations. That night, she took out a notebook and began scribbling names and numbers like a penitent accountant. I watched her draw columns labeled apology, amends, future. Do you think Dad would forgive me? She asked at last. Your father never stopped loving you, I said. Forgiveness was never the question. Becoming the person he knew you could be, that was. Before I could add another word, my phone lit with Ben's name. Eleanor, he said. I need to see you both first thing. It's about Lionel's inheritance. I knew what he would say. William's plan was reaching its crescendo. Ben's office felt different the next morning, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Lila arrived in her boutique uniform, black slacks, a simple blouse, flats that respected the mileage of a life on foot. The contrast with the green gown and jeweled evenings of a month ago would have made my heart ache if it hadn't already been through a threshing. Please sit, Ben said, his voice firm but gentle. The waterfront behind him looked like ribboned steel beneath a low sky. He placed a single document in the center of his desk and squared it with the blotter, a ritual I'd watched countless attorneys perform before delivering hard truths. Lila, he began, There's a condition attached to the bequest from Mr. Hart. She leaned forward, anxiety tightening her mouth. What kind of condition? Ben slid the paper toward her. Your Uncle Lionel was aware of your father's concerns and the events following Mr. Harding's death. Before he passed, he formalized a requirement. The inheritance can only be released when your mother certifies, in writing, that you have demonstrated a fundamental change in character and are prepared to manage a fortune responsibly. Silence pressed down like a weight-filled quilt. Lila lifted her eyes to me, not pleading, not defensive, simply open. You knew? She asked softly. I learned last night when Ben called, I said, which was not entirely untrue. He wanted us to hear it together. Lila swallowed. And what do you think? Do you believe I've changed enough to carry that kind of responsibility without becoming? She drifted off, searching for a word she used to fling at others without a second thought. The person I was becoming. I studied her. Under the room's cool light, she looked younger, stripped of the armor of arrogance, stripped of the costume of money. The months had rearranged her posture, her speech, the way she gave someone else the floor. I thought of Danielle's boy in a hospital bed, and a diamond bracelet transformed into a scalpel's chance. I thought of Rosa's hands kneading dough and how quickly Lila had dismissed them. I thought of Patrick's robin and the cruelty of a gate closing on the man who attended our seasons. Before I answer, I said, I have a question for you. If I say you're not ready, if you lose Lionel's inheritance completely, what happens to you next? She didn't rush. She didn't flail. She considered. 2 months ago, I would have begged, she said. I would have promised anything, thrown a tantrum, weaponized tears. Now, she let out a breath that sounded like surrender and resolve bound with thread. Now, I think I'd be okay. I've learned I can survive without 8-figure accounts. I can show up for a shift. I can be of use. I'm not proud of who I was, but I like the person I'm trying to become. Ben's gaze flicked to mine. A quick message. She's ready to hear it. And if I say you are ready, I asked, what would you do with $75 million? She reached into her tote and pulled out the notebook from the night before, its edges already softened by thumbing. She set it down as if it were a living thing. First, amends, she said. Not performative donations, real repair. Rosa, Teresa, Patrick. Back pay, benefits, pensions, health care. The charities I gutted, immediate restoration and then some. The gala funds, double last year's commitments. Scholarships in Dad's name and in yours, focusing on students who grew up like Danielle's kids. Training programs, retail, trade, nursing, child care. For single parents who need a first rung. Emergency grants for staff in crises, so surgeries don't depend on pawn slips. After that, she swallowed. After that, a foundation, not a vanity project. Lean, transparent, staffed by people who've lived the problems we want to solve. And for your life? I asked. What would you keep? What would you let go? Enough to live decently, she said, almost apologetic. A home, not a museum. Shoes that fit my feet, not someone else's idea of worth. I don't need to prove anything with price tags anymore. Ben leaned back. On the record, he said dryly, that's the first time I've heard a prospective heir describe a budget as a moral instrument. Lila smiled without triumph. I learned the hard way that a credit limit isn't the same as character. She turned to me. Mom, I know this is a lot. If you say no, I'll keep working. I'll still sell what I can to help Danielle's family. I'll still apologize to people I harmed. I won't collapse. I let the quiet hold us a moment longer, then reached for Ben's pen. I'll sign, I said, but with structure. Ben's eyebrows rose the way they do when a chess move lands 3 turns sooner than expected. I waited for Lila to nod, giving her the dignity of consenting to accountability. "What kind of structure?" she asked. "A trust," I said. "Jointly managed for now. Every major outlay requires 2 signatures, yours and mine, or yours and a trustee if I'm gone. A set percentage earmarked for public good. Not vague charity, but targeted, measurable commitments, benchmarks, audits, community boards with real authority, people like Danielle and Patrick at the table, not just as recipients, but as decision makers. Your salary from the trust capped at something sensible. And a sunset clause. Once you've demonstrated steady stewardship, say 5 years, we loosen the reins." Lila straightened. "I accept." "You haven't seen the numbers." "I accept anyway. If I've learned anything, it's that money can protect you from reality until it becomes a costume you can't take off. I don't want that costume back." Ben pulled fresh documents from a side drawer. He had foreseen this, the way good lawyers do, and perhaps the way William had trained him to operate. He filled blanks while we discussed percentages, caps, review cycles. Lila asked questions that surprised me. Not, "How much do I get?" but "How do we make sure this doesn't become another shiny program that photographs well and fails quietly?" She had started, I realized, to look at dollars like seeds instead of trophies. We took turns signing. Ben notarized and stacked pages into a tidy tower. "Before we adjourn," I said, my voice low, "there's one more truth you need to know." Lila's jaw tensed, then unclenched. "I'm listening." "Everything you believed about your windfall," I said gently, "was a scaffolding your father built to teach you without destroying you." Ben opened a second folder, thicker, heavier, and arranged documents across the glass like tiles forming a mosaic. The real will, the operative addendum, the banking instructions under my maiden name, a letter of intent that read like a love note wrapped in legalese. "Your father's public will name you as sole heir," I continued. "But from the beginning, his plan included a reversion clause triggered by cruelty. The recording Ben made of the day you expelled me, that alone would have moved everything back. The additional accounts? They were always mine. The friend Tobias in the old stories was our Lionel, and even his estate, though genuine, was designed with checks to ensure you wouldn't carry a fortune until you could carry yourself." Lila covered her mouth with her hand. Tears leaked out despite the pressure. "You both let me believe I held everything. We let you live with your choices," I said, "and with their consequences. We didn't abandon you. We stood back far enough for you to see the cliff you were steering toward." She cried then, a deep, rupturing grief that had nothing to do with lost money and everything to do with found clarity. Ben slid a tissue box across the desk without a word. "The $50 million to the con artists?" she whispered at last. "That wasn't part of the plan." "No," Ben said. "That was the world being the world. Your father anticipated mistakes. He did not orchestrate fraud, but I'll say this as a practitioner, that loss may have bought you a lesson no seminar could." "And Lionel's bequest?" "Real," I said. "And now, ours to steward wisely." She stared at the signatures drying in neat lines. "Can you forgive me?" she asked. A child's question and a woman's. "I forgave you the day you slammed the door," I said. Forgiveness was my hedge against turning into a version of you I wouldn't recognize. She let out a small, startled laugh, then wiped her face. "What happens next, then? With the big picture?" "Next," I said, "we decide who we are." In the days that followed, we got to work. Ben finalized the heart disbursement under the new trust. We reopened conversations with organizations Lila had slighted and returned with checks. and apologies. Word traveled fast, some accepted with a dignified nod, others with tears, a few with cautious reminders that trust takes longer to rebuild than a budget. "Would you like your membership back?" the Hawthorne Club's director asked with a brittle politeness that said reputations circulate on their own timetable. "No, thank you," I replied. "We'll put those dues into a scholarship for the club's hourly staff and their families." The director's face rearranged itself, first confusion, then something like respect. Lila spent afternoons at the boutique and evenings at my kitchen table sketching the framework for what we started calling, at first jokingly, then with quiet pride, the Harding Promise. Not a vanity foundation, but a compact with the city that had made us and watched us stumble. We recruited an inaugural board, Danielle, who rolled her eyes at the thought of titles but agreed after we insisted there'd be childcare, and paid meeting stipends. Rosa, who arrived with a notebook and an audit of what domestic workers actually need. Patrick, who wore his good blazer and a tie the color of a hydrangea. Henry from the foundation she'd insulted, who, bless his graciousness, agreed to advise and keep us honest. "Ground rules," Lila said at the first meeting, her voice steady. 1. Nothing about us without us. 2. Cash beats coupons, rent beats ribbon cuttings. 3. If a program photographs better than it performs, we fix it or kill it. Danielle raised a hand. Add a 4th. Paperwork in plain English. If I need a law degree to apply for help, it's not help. We all wrote it down. Between meetings, we worked through our private list. Lila insisted on seeing people face to face. Some meetings were tender, some were brutal. Rosa accepted the apology with tears and a hug that smelled like cinnamon in memory. "I always knew the little girl who ate my empanadas would come back," she said, patting Lila's cheek. Teresa crossed her arms and made my daughter squirm for 8 long minutes before allowing her to offer reinstatement and a pension plan. "I don't need the job," Teresa said, "but I'll sit on your board and make sure you never do this to anyone else." Patrick listened, nodded once, and said, "You're not the first rich person to lose their way. Be the rare kind who doesn't pretend they never did." He accepted a contract to supervise a training program for young landscapers with full benefits through Harding Promise. The next week, he brought the robin's shoebox he'd saved, empty now but still lined with soft cloth. "For your office," he said, "to remember how small things can be." Lila returned to the boutique, but not for long hours every day. "I'll cut down to weekends," she told her manager. "I'm starting something that takes daylight." The 20-year-old manager smirked until Lila showed up with an HR consultant from our foundation to audit scheduling practices and implement paid sick leave. The smirk softened into curiosity. A month later, she texted Lila for advice about going back to school. We moved me out of the hotel and into an apartment overlooking the public garden. Sunlit, modest by our old standards, luxurious by most. I kept the place spare on purpose. A teapot, books, framed photographs of William laughing in shirt sleeves, Lila at 6 with a gap-toothed grin, my parents on a porch in Ohio with dandelion crowns. On a bright afternoon in early spring, Ben called. "There's a matter in New York," he said. "A safe deposit box William set terms around. The triggers you and Lila agreed to have been met." "What triggers?" Lila asked, half amused, half wary. "Proof you've held paid employment for at least 3 months," Ben read. "Documented assistance to an individual in crisis, and executed reconciliation documents between mother and daughter." She shook her head and laughed through her nose. "Dad really built an obstacle course with checklists." "Your father loved scavenger hunts," I said, smiling despite the ache his name still brought. "Let's go." The vault was exactly the cliché. Thick door, chilled air, a private room with a metal table that felt like an altar. A bank officer wheeled in a medium-sized box and left us alone. Ben broke the seal and stepped back as if the next part was between William and us. Inside, a few financial statements we had not seen, small in number, large in implication, and a stack of letters bundled with cotton ribbon. Dates in William's compact scripts, each envelope titled for a moment, for when Lila has learned the dignity of work, for when Eleanor has forgiven herself for the necessary hard thing, for when you both sit at the same table by choice, not obligation. Lila put her hand on the top letter, closed her eyes, and then slid it free. "My girl," she read aloud, voice wobbling, "if you're holding this, you've earned something better than money, your own respect. Work is not punishment. It is a mirror that shows you, and sometimes fixes you." She passed me the next envelope. "Eleanor, my brave one," William wrote, "you did what I could not. You stood firm while our daughter flailed. You paid a tax in loneliness so she could find herself. I know that cost. Thank you for paying it." We opened the third letter together, our shoulders touching. "If you are reading this side by side," it said, "then the miracle I angled for in drafts and clauses has happened. Money didn't save us. Love, stubborn, principled, inconvenient, did." Lila laughed wetly and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "That sounds like Dad." At the bottom of the box lay another envelope, heavier, sealed with wax the color of plums. Ben raised an eyebrow. "There's a notation," he said, "for after the first board meeting of the Harding Promise." We looked at each other, then at the envelope, then, as if he were still orchestrating a dance from the other side of a curtain, put it back for later. Back upstairs, the city greeted us with ordinary life. Cabs honking, a couple arguing in Spanish about where they'd parked, a boy with a melted popsicle tracking a red drip down his arm and smiling like summer didn't have to end. I felt William in those ordinaries, not just in the gold-lettered names on stationery. "Have you noticed," Lila said as we crossed to a coffee stand, "that I'm happier now? Tired in my bones, worried about spreadsheets, juggling a calendar like a bartender, but happier. When I could buy anything, nothing tasted like anything. Purpose salts everything," I said, "makes the simple unbearable to live without." We launched the Harding Promise on a Wednesday in April without a press conference. Instead, we mailed letters, real, folded paper, to the people who mattered first, staff who had kept our home running for years, directors whose programs we'd harmed, neighbors who had watched our implosion with curiosity, pity, and stories told over fences. Inside each envelope, the board's charter, the first targets, a phone number that rang to a human being with authority to say yes. "Isn't it risky not to chase PR?" Ben asked. "We'll let the results market themselves," Lila said. And they did. Within a month, the emergency fund paid for 9 surgeries, 7 eviction preventions, and 2 unexpected funerals. No GoFundMe links necessary. A childcare pilot at a shelter let 23 mothers accept daytime jobs. The scholarship line formed around a city block. We moved 3/4 of it online, with assistance tables in libraries staffed by paid neighbors. A rent-to-own greenhouse project grew out of Patrick's training program. Teenagers who had only ever been told to keep off lawns were earning certifications. Our city is small enough that when something works, 100 conversations carry it across neighborhoods by dinner. Not everyone applauded. There were skeptics, some fair, some performative. A columnist mused whether our contrition was branding. An old acquaintance sniffed that handouts breed dependence, a phrase that flattens lives into theory. Lila learned to answer criticism without flinching or fawning. "You're welcome to examine our outcomes. We publish them monthly. One evening, as we walked along the Charles and watched scullers stripe the river, Lila turned to me. "Can we talk about Dad's letter where he mentioned more?" she asked. "You hinted there were accounts I didn't know existed, and then New York delivered letters like Matryoshka dolls." I nodded. "There's one more layer." Back at my apartment, I unlocked a small fireproof box and removed an envelope with my name in William's compact hand, different from the letter he'd written for after the cruelty. This one was dated 2 years earlier. "Eleanor," it read, "if we make it to this point, tell Lila what I'm about to tell you. I've been giving quietly for 5 years, through conduits that don't bear our name. Some of it was prudence, some of it was an experiment. Would the work feel cleaner if it wasn't attached to my face? We funded clinics in Appalachia and reservations in the Dakotas, free legal aid for tenants in 3 cities, stipends for single fathers, who are often invisible in these schemes, school meal programs that operate like dignified grocery stores. If you and Lila take up the mantle, you'll find dossiers at Harbor and Commonwealth, under the Collins alias, so you can continue or correct without me." He listed contacts, names I had not seen but would learn to pronounce, places we would visit in months to come. He'd included projections suggesting that if we kept pace, the aggregate value of our commitments and holdings would crest far above any figure we had discussed in public. Lila read in silence, then let out a shaky laugh. "He made altruism a stealth acquisition. He made love a line item," I said, and gave it a runway. We looked up the alias portfolios in Avery's office the next day. She gave me a look that crossed professionalism with something like affection. "I was waiting for you to ask," she said. What she unfolded was both humbling and galvanizing. Long-term commitments that didn't depend on our moods. Escrowed funds designed to vest only if certain metrics were met. Triggers that protected beneficiaries from our potential future foolishness. "Your husband thought in guardrails," Avery said. "I wish more clients did." "So do I said, thinking of how often wealth strangles meaning when there's nothing to pull it back into usefulness. 2 months later, we convened the first full board meeting of the Harding Promise in a borrowed community center, with flickering lights and coffee so strong it felt like a dare. Danielle called us to order and ran the agenda with the brisk authority of a woman who had never had the luxury of wasting hours. Rosa kept time. Patrick presented a plan to double the greenhouse project's footprint. Henry flagged governance pitfalls and offered templates for transparency that would survive our deaths. At the end, Lila stood. She wore a navy dress and the sort of shoes that proclaim, "I will be on my feet for 6 hours, and none of you will hear me complain." Her voice did not waver. "I used to think leadership was owning the biggest thing in the room," she said. "Now I think it's listening to the people it's easiest to ignore. Thank you for letting me help steer something that doesn't belong to me." There were no applause lines. There was no grandstanding. There was a vote to approve pilot expansions and a unanimous motion to establish a hardship line staffed by social workers with decision power to say yes up to a threshold without dragging people through maze-like applications. We adjourned at 8:46 p.m. Danielle collected the used paper cups and stuffed them into a grocery bag because old habits are slow to retire. Back home, I retrieved the plum-sealed envelope from the safe. Lila and I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where we had argued over curfews a lifetime ago, and broke the seal together. "My loves," William had written, "if you're opening this, then you didn't chase headlines. You chased outcomes. You put ordinary people in charge of extraordinary decisions. You traded ease for purpose. I am proud of you. Beyond the math. There's a final piece I kept back. Not because I didn't trust you, but because timing matters in love and money. He described a trust within the trust he had set up with Lionel's help, a reserve fund designed to activate only when we demonstrated community-led governance. It was modest by our new scale, $25 million, invested conservatively, but it came with a note: use this only when bureaucracy blocks compassion. Make the bottlenecks your enemy. Cut through them like a surgeon cuts to save, not to show off. Lila pressed the letter to her chest. He knew us, all our worst and all our best, and he bet on our best. He invested in it, I said. Then he structured the terms to nudge us there. We sat in companionable quiet, drinking tea that had cooled too much to be good, and refusing to reheat it because it felt like a ritual we needed to complete as it was. Mom, Lila said, do you ever wish we could go back to before all this? Before what? I asked. Before your father died? Every day? Before you threw me out? No. She blinked. I shrugged. I don't want to relive the pain, but I also don't want to live without the woman I've met in the past months. She looked down at her hands, the same capable hands I'd watched tie shoelaces, twirl sparklers on the cape, sign away donations like trophies, and now sign checks like a promise. I can't promise I'll never backslide, she said, frank as only the changed can be. But if I start to, stop me. Remind me of Danielle's boy and Rosa's wrists and Patrick's robin. Remind me of the hospital bills that don't care about our intentions. Remind me of Dad's handwriting. I will, I said. And you do the same for me. When grief turns me rigid or fear makes me tight-fisted. She smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that still startled me after all our detours. Deal. The summer that followed moved like a tide, steady retreats, firm advances. We sold the Beacon Hill townhouse, by then a museum of contradictions, and bought 2 smaller properties, a brick row house closer to the neighborhoods we served, with a backyard big enough for Patrick's trainees to experiment, and a coastal cottage on a quieter stretch of the Cape, not for status, but for respite, and for small planning retreats where ocean air made hard decisions feel less like cliffs and more like long walks. We held a memorial for William under a tent pitched on a community college quad, the kind of place he would have loved for its humility. People spoke, not about his balance sheet, but about the time he showed up with a truck at dawn to move an overburdened shelter, the way he insisted on paying the tuition for a receptionist who'd decided at 40 to become a nurse, the jokes he told badly because he laughed too early at his own punchlines. Lila stood at the edge of the stage and listened like a student. When it was her turn, she didn't read off a teleprompter. She told the truth. My father didn't rescue me with money, she said. He rescued me by letting me hit the bottom of my own choices, and by trusting me to climb. If you're holding a grudge against me, you're not wrong. But please hold me to the standard I'm promising today. Don't let me off the hook because I'm contrite. Help me be accountable. The sky paid us a small compliment and held off the rain until the last folding chair was stacked. Afterward, Danielle's oldest came up to Lila and tugged her sleeve. Miss Harding, he said solemnly, my mom says thank you. I say thank you too, because I still have my brother. Lila gathered herself with visible effort, knelt to eye level, and said, Tell your brother we're building a city where nobody has to sell a bracelet to make a surgery happen. And tell your mom I'll see her at the board meeting Tuesday. On an ordinary Tuesday in late August, while I was drafting a policy note about simplifying grant renewals, an email pinged from Avery at Harbor and Commonwealth. It contained a simple attachment, a quarterly roll-up. The number at the bottom shouldn't have mattered, but it did, because numbers are stories in shorthand. Between the trust's growth, the heart bequest, and the performance of William's quiet investments, our total assets had crossed the half-billion mark again, despite disbursements that made us feel, daily, like human ATMs with consciences. I stared at the digits and thought of something William had once said when Lila was small, and I fretted about whether we were raising her to be kind. Wealth is a weather system, he'd told me, thumb rubbing the knot between my eyebrows. If we don't build roofs and plant trees with it, it just blows people around. I forwarded the report to Lila with a single line: "Let's keep planting." She replied from a site visit at a training kitchen we'd funded in Dorchester. Her selfie showed her in a hairnet and an apron dusted with flour, grinning like the girl who had once rolled out pie dough with me on a June morning. The caption, "On it, boss." I laughed so hard I scared the cat. That night we walked along the harbor walk in the velvet heat and said William's name out loud, the way grief counselors encourage but few people do once the casserole dishes stop arriving. We said it like a toast, a benediction, a check-in. "William," Lila said to the water, "we're doing it. Not perfectly, but truly." A breeze lifted from the water and moved across our bodies like an answer that needs no words. Autumn came early that year. The maples along the common went crimson almost overnight, as if Boston itself wanted to remind us that change can happen faster than we think. By then, the Harding Promise had survived its first summer, and our little team had already seen what William predicted, lives changing not because of the size of checks, but because of the dignity behind them. But William wasn't done with us yet. Avery called one afternoon. "Mrs. Harding, there's one last item I didn't want to release until I was certain all conditions were satisfied." Another box, another set of instructions in William's meticulous hand. When Lila and I opened it, we found not bank statements this time, but a stack of letters sealed in wax. Each was labeled with moments William could never have witnessed in person, yet somehow had anticipated with unnerving precision. For when Lila learns compassion without prompting, for when Eleanor stops confusing endurance with silence, for when mother and daughter speak with one voice. We read them aloud in turns, voices catching, laughing at the familiarity of his phrasing, crying at the places where he wrote as a strategist one line and as a husband the next. In one, he admitted something we hadn't known. For 5 years, he had been giving away money, anonymously, funding college tuition for 500 students, underwriting rural hospitals in Appalachia, keeping shelters open through winters when heating oil doubled. "You mean all this time," Lila whispered. While I was throwing parties and measuring my worth in handbags, he was, she trailed off, feeding families, buying incubators, writing hope into budgets. I finished. William had tied those donations to our future, too. If we carried forward the work with integrity, the programs would continue in our name, not as vanity, but as legacy. Rebuilding bridges was never as simple as writing checks. Some people refused to meet with Lila at all. One director of a scholarship program told her bluntly, "You humiliated us when you cut funding mid-semester. Students had to drop out. Money doesn't erase that." Lila didn't argue. She listened. She took notes. Then she asked what would make amends real, not symbolic. Together they drafted a plan for multi-year commitments, with oversight boards run by students themselves. That night she admitted to me, "I expected anger. I didn't expect people to give me another chance." I smiled. "That's the thing about trust, darling. It's rarely deserved in advance. It's earned in installments." When we finally convened the full board of the Harding Promise, Danielle banged the gavel on a borrowed folding table and declared us in session. The agenda was long: eviction prevention funds, training program expansion, childcare stipends. At the end, I pulled from my bag the plum-sealed letter we'd been saving. The room fell into a hush as I broke the wax. "If you're opening this, it means you've chosen governance over glitter," William had written. "It means you've given real power to people who once had none. Here's the final trust I hid even from Ben. $25 million earmarked only for one purpose: cutting through red tape when red tape costs lives. Use it sparingly, use it boldly, use it as if time itself were the currency." The board voted unanimously to accept. Danielle said, "Then let's make bureaucracy our enemy." Months later, we held a public memorial for William, not the stately Affairs Society pages expected, but a gathering on a community college lawn. Students, shelter directors, gardeners, clerks, nurses, people who had known his quiet generosity, took the microphone one by one. When it was Lila's turn, she didn't stand behind the podium. She walked to the edge of the stage, close enough that the front row could see her trembling hands. "My father didn't save me with money," she said. "He saved me by letting me fall and by trusting I would learn to climb. If you doubt me, you're right to. If you forgive me, hold me accountable anyway. Please don't let me forget what it feels like to be powerless, because that memory is the only thing keeping me honest." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was steady, sustained, almost prayerful. Weeks later, Avery sent another roll-up. The numbers staggered even me. Over $500 million in assets, even after disbursements. But William's letters reframed everything. Money was weather. We could let it flood, or we could channel it into rivers that irrigated dry ground. I sent the report to Lila with a note. "Let's keep planting." She replied with a photo from a training kitchen, her in a hairnet, laughing with flour on her face. Caption: "Already sewing, boss." I laughed so hard I scared the cat. 1 year after my eviction and our reconciliation, we sat in the office of the Harding Promise late into the night. On the table were 50 applications for microloans to single mothers starting small businesses, food trucks, daycare centers, tailoring shops. Lila stamped each one approved. "Mom," she asked quietly, "do you think Dad would be proud of us?" I looked at her, the daughter who had once pushed me out into the rain, now sitting beside me designing ladders for strangers. I thought of William's letters, his clauses, his endless faith that love and patience could outmaneuver greed. "He knew exactly who we would become," I said. "And I think he's smiling now, because his plan didn't just work, it worked better than he dreamed." Outside, the city slept, unaware that 2 women were rewriting their family's legacy, one decision at a time. William had been right. The true inheritance was never the fortune. It was the capacity of the human heart to turn grief into compassion, selfishness into generosity, and loss into purpose. And in that, we were wealthier than we had ever been.